The man, the myth, the legend, Ian. I appreciate you stopping by and coming on the podcast, man. How you doing?
My pleasure, Steve. Thanks for having me. And I know, months and years from now, it's going to be a waiting list to get on this, I assume, based on the metrics I'm seeing. So I got in here on the ground level, so I'm happy to be here right off the rip.
So, I've talked to you before, but I feel like I don't know much about like the behind the scenes of Ian, right? Like your life growing up, what school did you go to? You want to give me a rundown of like who Ian is, how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I feel as though your mom and dad know me better than you do, right? Through cable access and the radio station, but sure. So I'm 39 years old, born and bred here in the city of New Bedford. I'm a lifelong South End New Bedford resident, product of the New Bedford public school system. Grew up, went to the Alfred J. Gomes Elementary School and New Bedford High School after that. Then from there, I went to Bridgewater State, now university, but it was college at the time. Received my degree in communication arts and sciences. So that was kind of like my schooling side. Growing up through the city, always had a love for the community, always had a love for the city. I remember a job I had in college, for example. I was a tour guide at the Siemens Bethel. I would offer tours and, give tourists an explanation kind of about what the Bethel was all about and what the Mariners' home was all about and how it's so integral to the working waterfront history of New Bedford. So, that's a little bit about my schooling background and growing up here in the city. Of course, like a lot of kids, young boys and girls, I played youth sports. I played, youth baseball for the SCYAA. I played youth hockey for the Hetland Panthers at the time. Now it's the South Coast Panthers at Hetland Arena. I'm married. I've got two children, Adria and Hunter, an 8 and a 4-year-old. I've got a wife, Samantha. We've been married now for 12 years. And I live here in the South End still in the same neighborhood I grew up in. I grew up on Bellevue Street on the east side, bought a home on the west side as a starter home on Aquidneck. When our family was growing, we sold our Aquidneck Street home. Now we own a home on Ricketson Street, which is, those who are familiar, it's right next to the Poor Farm right here in the South End.
Gotcha, yeah.
Right next to the SCYAA complex and next to the creamery that I have. So it's, I'm in the same neighborhood I grew up in, and I'm comfortable there, and it's a great place to raise your kids and have a family.
And did you always know you wanted to get into politics, or when did you decide you wanted to dip your toes into running for public office?
No, not really. I've always loved the city, and I always loved communications and marketing and getting messaging out there about an initiative or an event or a program or a sports event or whatever the case may be. I was really into sports communications coming up through the ranks. Politics was a little bit different. Some people say, when I was 3, 4 years old, 5 years old, I knew I wanted to be in politics, or I knew I wanted to be a police officer, a firefighter, or an astronaut, or whatever. For me, it wasn't like that. It kind of morphed over the years, and I think life is about a metamorphosis of oneself. The first chapter of your life is way different than the chapter of 8 or 9 or 10, so I started getting a real love for local policy work probably around the time I was doing the Siemens Bethel stuff, because I really, it was linked to a lot of history, nautical history in the city. I got to meet a lot of the elected officials at that time. At the time, it was Mayor Fred Kalis. Things like the Fisherman's Memorial Service at the waterfront. I got to meet a lot of city councilors at that time, got to talk to them, see what they do, understand kind of the totality and the scope of their work. And then from there, I just really started to follow what's going on via local radio. At the time, it wasn't like New Bedford got a social media. At that time, it was, a print newspaper and the radio. That was really the main focus of how you'd get your information. Twitter really wasn't on the scene yet. This is around 2007, 2008. It was just starting to get to its ascension. At the time, MySpace was the big thing.
Yeah, I remember that, yep.
You remember that. And then Facebook at the time just came on the scene, but you may recall, it was just for college kids. Yep. I was a college student at Bridgewater.
It was like a dating app, right? It was basically a college dating app.
That's
almost.
Correct. So I found out that what Facebook is, because all those guys, Zuckerberg and all of them, they went to Harvard. What Facebook is, it was when the upperclassmen would get the new registry from the Harvard freshmen every year. Because I guess the way Harvard did it, or still does it, is they take headshots of all the new freshmen coming in, and it's a book. And it was called the Facebook. And that's where all the guys would go to try to look at the cute girls and circle the ones they wanted to go pursue, you know? And it kind of morphed into this thing that's Facebook, and there you go. So that's a little history about Facebook, which I didn't know about. I learned about that recently. So see, you listen to me, you might learn something. But so that's when I got into a real love of politics. And then I decided to start running. I ran a couple of times. I was unsuccessful. I had run for Ward 6, which is the south end here in New Bedford.
Was there anything in particular that made you want to run? Was there an event that happened or something that maybe someone inspired you that made you want to run for office?
Well, I don't know about... Well, my mother had to run for City Council when I was a young boy, 1995. And she had just finished just below the bubble. But at that time, she was running against people like... Tom Hodgson and George Rogers and Brian Gomes and Dennis Lawrence, a lot of heavy hitters. And it was tough to crack the top 5 back then, and social media, again, didn't exist. So it was a little bit more difficult to get your message out, where today it's a little bit easier in that sense. So being involved in campaigns with her, seeing the work and the amount of toil that she put into it, I think that really inspired me to want to get involved in politics in that sense, like to see that this is kind of fun, like doing the visibilities, going door to door. But then I grew up a little bit. I was in high school, still not into politics. But then it kind of came full circle around college when I started to really get involved in city affairs. And I think taxpayer services was really something that inspired me. Like I would go to these neighborhood meetings, for example, like the Clarks Point Neighborhood Association, and I would hear these residents talk about quality of life issues, property taxes, talking about crime in neighborhoods, talking about our economic development, or at the time lack thereof, and how we can bring new jobs to the city. And I like to try to be a problem solver, and I thought at that time, well, maybe I could do my part and get involved and try to be a piece to the puzzle and try to help, because I was always raised, and I've always believed in, and I want to pass this on to my kids. If you're not part of the solution, you could be part of the problem. You got to get involved. I'm not saying run for office, but start a neighborhood group. Volunteer time for a board or commission, serve on the board of a nonprofit. Just try to do your part. For example, you got like Operation Clean Sweep. They do great work every single month. Volunteer for that. I think if everybody chips in a little bit and does their part, I think the city would be a much greater place.
Now, here's a question. So I think one of the most underrated, difficult things when you're becoming a politician running for office is public speaking, right? Coming into a podcast with the lights and cameras and just sitting down and just talking, right? Or going into City Hall and speaking your mind in front of other people. Was that a barrier that you had to cross? Did you have a tough time with public speaking in the beginning, or is that something that you are always comfortable with?
It kind of came natural to me, and it doesn't for others, but for me it did, because remember, we'll go back to when I was in college and in high school. I did a lot of TV production at New Bedford High School. I did a lot of radio and TV work. In college, I did a lot of broadcasting of like games and basketball and baseball and football. So I was always comfortable in front of a mic. It was a little bit different in politics, though, because when you're in front of a mic like this, there's no people in front of you. Mm-hmm. But when you're on a debate stage, you may have hundreds in an audience. Or when you're in the city council chambers, it's getting hot and heavy, you're debating an issue, the council chambers may be packed. So speaking in front of a mic like this isn't really a big deal. But when there's people looking at you by the hundreds sometimes, or you're making a speech at a ribbon cutting or a grand opening or whatever the case may be, that's more of an art form. Some people are really good off the cuff. They're really good. I always try to get it in my head ahead of time. Like I'll be sitting there at this press conference and I'm running through the script in my head because I don't have a teleprompter. Okay, I'm not a big shot like that.
I used to work at Cable Access. I used to be like a videographer over there.
I remember that. Yeah.
And I would run around. It'd be like a Saturday morning. I'd be tired. Maybe I was up late last night, and I would go film a ribbon cutting or something. And I would remember you guys like just would go up there and just give like a 10-minute speech, and I would think like, how the hell, man, this early in the morning, do you just come up off the top of your head, just know what to say?
Well, you know what it is though? A lot of it is boilerplate, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but if it's like of a small business, you know the points you've got to hit.
Yeah.
Thank you to so-and-so and their family for investing in the city of New Bedford. Thank you for creating the jobs. boy, I checked out these donuts this morning. Oh man, make a little lighthearted joke, or it's not good for the waistline. You add in a little bit of laugh, a little bit of razzle dazzle. I think
a little bit of razzle dazzle,
little razzle dazzle, and you can do it. But it all depends. I mean, like you go to a ribbon cutting or grand opening of a manufacturing plant. That's a difference. So it all depends on what we're doing and what the subject matter is, but. You try to do your homework ahead of time before you make a speech because you don't want to have any faux pas or any silly moments where you look kind of foolish because, as you know, these things last forever. Screenshots last forever. This podcast will last forever. So you got to be careful what you say, too. You got to be very mindful of the subject matter and don't veer off the course.
Yeah. Well, now you are a city councilor, and you're the big dog on campus now. This past election, I think you had the most votes out of all of your of the city councilors.
Yeah,
a lot of people, man, in the comments we post that they say, "Hey, when's Ian going to run for mayor?" Is that something that you've ever considered, or is that something you plan on potentially doing in the future? Seem like a very liked guy. I've always heard nice things about you. Clearly, it reflects in the votes. So that's a pretty logical question. Is that something you have interest in?
I mean, never say never. I mean, to be honest with you, I'm really focused right now, and this might sound political, and I promise you,
we're on to Cincinnati,
and I promise all the viewers and listeners, I'm not giving a political BS filibuster answer. I'm a straightforward guy. Honestly, as of today, I'm focused on being a great city councilor, great business owner, great dad, great husband, but the door is certainly open for other future political endeavors, especially if there are any situations where there are special elections, open seats. I mean, the next mayor's election is not for 3 more years, so who knows what's going to happen. So a lot can happen.
I'd be curious your take on that. So it used to be every 2 years was the mayor election. Now it's every 4. What was your take when that change happened?
I didn't support that. I didn't vote for that. I voted for the 2-year mayor's term or against the 4 years because I support the 2-year mayor's term. My opinion is this. If we councilors are held accountable every 2 years, whomever the mayor is, there's nothing to do with John Mitchell or anybody. Any mayor should be held accountable on the ballot like we are. And I know the argument is, well, if you give me 2 instead of 4, I've got to focus on campaigning and I'm not doing the job. But my counter to that is, if you're doing the work and doing right by the people, creating good jobs, making our communities safe, making sure our infrastructure is where it needs to be, making sure our port is thriving, and you can go on and on and on, that is campaigning. Doing the job, doing the work is campaigning. So just to say, well, if it's 2 years, 6 months in, I'm already knocking on doors, well, that's not, that's a very linear attitude. Doing the work, doing the job, servicing constituents every single day, that's how you do the job. 99% of what I do, and what others do too, but I'll speak for me, is all behind the scenes. And when I say behind the scenes, it's not like this cryptic behind the scenes. It's casework. Constituents call me about quality of life issues, issues about properties in their neighborhood that might be in ruins, or infrastructure issues, crumbling sidewalks, dead trees, crime in their neighborhoods. I do the casework. I work with these department heads. We bring relief to these residents. If it's a senior citizen having questions or concerns about the senior abatement process on their property taxes, connecting them with the appropriate folks in the assessor's office. I mean, it's things like that. It's the casework every day, the constituent service that keeps me around and keeps people around, and I'm proud of that. Now, somebody made a joke once on one of these forums, called me the pothole counselor. Damn right, I'm proud of that. I wear that as a badge of honor. You want to call me the pothole counselor? I'm not upset with that at all because you know what? That residence that has to back up out of their driveway and they bottom out on that sinkhole or that pothole every day and it's wrecking their shocks.
Wait, so what do they mean by that? So they mean...
The pothole counselor, meaning that that's all I do is fill potholes.
Oh, I thought they meant like your ward has a bunch of potholes.
No. Filling potholes, that kind of stuff, infrastructure.
Oh, yeah, that's annoying if there's a pothole outside of my house.
That resident that has to back up and bottom out over that, if I can get that man, woman, whomever, if I can get their pothole in front of their home filled so they're not bottoming out every morning when they have to leave and bring their kids to work, I've made their life better, and I'm proud of that. And I stand by that. So, somebody made that because it was one of the threads about me running for mayor, and someone said, well, there's more to it than just filling potholes, the pothole counselor. Well, of course there is, but don't ever degrade or denigrate someone's quality of life. It's very important. It's the broken window theory. Remember that in politics. If you can't take care of the little things, you can't take care of the big things, Little things, and then the big things come after that.
Ian Abreu spitting game right now for the young politicians. I like it.
Well, you know what's funny, Steve? You know what's funny is that these people, they run for office, and I always tell them when they run, and these younger folks that want to run for councilor, for whatever, they go up on a debate stage, they go on Facebook, they talk about all the grandiose things, which are important. Mm-hmm. We're going to put more cops on the beat walking the neighborhood. We're going to invest more money in marketing for tourism. I'm going to bring X company here, that company here. That's all fodder for a debate stage. That's fine. But you find when you get in, that's when the real work begins, especially when you're a counselor. You got to work with 10 other people, 10 other sets of personalities, and a mayor, and a school committee, a state delegation, both reps and a senator. You're going to deal with federal people. You got 2 senators, a congressman, and then the president. So there's definitely different branches of government that you have to deal with and coincide with. So no one person running for office, if they tell you that they're going to be the savior of New Bedford, they're feeding you a line, okay? It's about working together collaboratively with department heads of the state, the federal government. No one person has the silver bullet to fix all New Bedford's problems, but it's about collaboration and working together.
So you guys heard it here first on the New Bedford Podcast. Ian will be running for mayor in 3. So
all I'll have to say is good things come to those who wait.
Yeah. So, well, you mentioned the port, and that's a highly debated topic right now is the offshore wind and the fishermen. Yeah. I think there's actually a protest happening right now at a ribbon cutting event.
And I'm not there because I'm here with you, Stephen.
Exactly. So what is your take on this whole battle between the offshore wind and the fishermen? And some people are saying that the offshore wind is hurting the marine life.
I've been saying it for years, and it still hasn't happened. And that's where, like, the New Bedford Ocean Cluster was supposed to bridge that gap. Fishing and wind have to coexist and figure out a way to thrive together. The two still are not at the table together, and it's unfortunate because now it sounds like I'm copying maybe a little bit of Sean Oliver's answer from last week whenever you had him on, but he's not wrong when he says we don't know about what the long-term effects are of what these wind turbines are going to do in the ocean. We know a couple of things. We know that the federal regulations have been overwhelming on the fishing industry, whether it's the at-sea fishing monitors of hundreds of dollars a day, the Magnus-Stevens Act that was enacted in the 80s that really put limits on what you could catch. There are studies that are out there. And by the way, we don't have enough studies, enough quantitative or qualitative data to say what the long-term effects are of what offshore wind does to the fishing and sea life. But we know this. This is a fact because we're already experiencing it. Ask any scalloper, ask any clammer or any lobsterman. The vibrations of these turbines in the water, these shellfish, they migrate. They move elsewhere. Now trying to track them down, that's a whole different ball game. That's going to be difficult. So now we've given another hurdle to our fishing industry. I'm not saying offshore wind can't thrive in New Bedford or in general, but I would definitely have had a little more of a delayed approach in making sure we analyze more data before we just went all in on wind. Because wind can create jobs. A lot of temporary jobs, by the way, because once these things are constructed and out there,
that's one thing we talked about.
That's the thing
in the Sean Oliver podcast is the job hours instead of the jobs.
That's correct. So you could read the fine print, job hours. Now, once these things are constructed, and don't get me wrong, like Vineyard Wind and these companies are doing great work in the sense of they've signed MOUs with Local 385, the Teamsters, all these unions. We're talking gilded work, which is fantastic. And they're paying prevailing wage, which is awesome. I respect all of that. I think that's great. But what happens once these things are out there and constructed? Those are our jobs, as we just said, and they're temporary in that sense. And then there's going to be routine maintenance, ongoing maintenance, but a lot of that is not at 40 hours a week. It's jobs here, jobs there. A compressor is wrong here. There's a motor issue here. There's a blade failure there. Send a crew out. So what are we talking about long-term success of offshore wind? And you look at our electric bills through Eversource. They've gone through the roof because of this, because these companies are forced now to help subsidize some of the offshore wind industry, like Eversource. That's why our bills are through the roof. I can tell you, for example, at the creamery, the Surfside Creamery that I own with my partners, our Eversource electric bill last month was $1,900. One of my partners at the creamery, his restaurant, I won't put it out there, but I'll say this: his bill for last month, the electric, was $4,600.
Wow.
But because Eversource has been now carrying and shifting some of the burden of financing and funding these offshore wind programs has been shifted onto Eversource International Grid. That's through the state legislature and the legislation, and that's kind of what happened. So now that's a trickle-down effect. It's a trickle-down effect to Eversource. It's business, right? They move the cost on to us, the consumer. So we now then, what do we have to do? We then have to move our cost onto our consumers, if you're a restaurant, or I don't care what you're doing, shoe shining, making food, making buttons, I don't know, whatever it is, you have to move that on to your customer or your consumer. What I'm trying to loop it all back in now to bring a full circle is that these are just sort of the unintended consequences of what offshore wind has been doing to the business community and the residential community as well, because everybody pays a gas and electric bill. So I'm not saying that offshore wind can't work, but there needs to be way more studies, way more dialogue, and fishing, for the love of God, please, gotta get them to the table, because they have some legitimate concerns, real concerns. Now, by the way, I see on social media a lot, if there's a beached whale or a dead dolphin, the narrative is always, oh, it's a turbine. Sometimes, sure, absolutely, they might get caught up in the vibration, something could happen, but not every beached whale is because of a turbine also. I'm not all in on wind, but I'm also fair. Like, I'm not just going to point or paint a narrative.
Well, I think
to fit an agenda.
Fairness is a good point, and obviously I work with New Bedford Guide. I read a lot of comments. This is a very hot button issue. And do you feel like there's not enough people holding the offshore wind companies accountable, in the sense that we're a very divided country in politics, and we are a very liberal state? Offshore wind is a very progressive thing, right? It's a very liberal thing.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Liberals tend to be for it. Conservatives tend to be against it. You're in a liberal state. Most people will be for it on paper. And I see a lot of people complaining that, hey, listen, these offshore wind companies came in and they donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to local media. They put all of the known protesters in the area on payrolls. There's really, and now they're funding studies in all of the local universities. So there's really no one there to hold them accountable. I mean, you're a politician. If you do something wrong, every local news station is going to be on your ass, right?
I'm accountable. Oh,
yeah.
Yes, we all are. You're right, and I don't disagree with you. I think that it's been a very touchy subject in many ways, to your point. I think we need more transparency. And by the way, I'm going to get back to it. The New Bedford Ocean Cluster, that was, and again, I follow a little bit about what they're doing, but their core mission, the New Bedford Ocean Cluster, maybe the executive director is someone you can get on. She can talk. She does good work. But their purpose is to bridge that gap, to represent fishing and wind industry, and how the two can coexist and thrive, as I said 10 minutes ago. I still see that anxiety. I still see that line in the sand that nobody is crossing. That's a problem. Look, don't take it from me. Take it from the fishing leaders. Take it from the boat captains. Take it from our friends at the waterfront. It's been death by 1,000 cuts of the fishing industry now for decades, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And it's unfortunate, because obviously, as goes the New Bedford port, goes really the world's food supply in many ways. We are the #1 commercial fishing port in the entire United States of America. We supply much of the world's scallops, sea clams, monkfish. A lot of lobstering is done throughout this region. If this economy starts to continue to fall by the wayside, if we continue to have more barriers in the way of the fishing industry, not only is our local economy affected, but now we're affecting business and industry all throughout the world, because there are a lot of people throughout this country, throughout this world, that rely on the port of New Bedford and the city of New Bedford, and those of whom occupy our working waterfront, to provide a service for the world. And that's not dramatic. It's the honest to God's truth. You can get people on from, you can get people from Norpel on here. You could get anyone from Northern Wind, and they'll all tell you. They'll show you their order sheet. They're supplying seafood and products throughout the entire world. But obviously that gets scaled back a little bit if we continue to have issues with our port as it relates to other new industries coming in, chipping away at the working waterfront. Because here's the deal. Someone in China or Vietnam or Thailand, if we can't get them what they need out of New Bedford, they'll go to Alaska, they'll go to somewhere in Maine, they'll go to somewhere down south in the Gulf of Mexico. They'll buy from somewhere else. And that hurts our local industry. That trickles down to our local employment opportunities. People might be getting their hours cut. There may be layoffs. It could be devastating. We have to be very mindful of all this.
And what are some of the specific things that are happening to the fishermen in our port that are restricting them? Is it where they're able to fish? Is it?
Yeah, right. Like I was talking about. I mean, well, first of all, the migration, right, of some of the sea life because the vibrations of turbines. We've seen some studies that have proven that that's happened. The things like the at-sea fishing monitors every day, where you have to have these monitors turned on that kind of documents where you're going, what you're doing. The purpose is for accountability, and that's fine. And like the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which is about the amount of catch you could do every day. They don't want people overfishing, which I understand. It's about accountability. It's about cranking down on corruption. But also, too, when you can only fish for certain times of the year due to the weather, due to certain kind of staffing issues, or because of you have boat maintenance issues, you've got to try to make some hay. So there's got to be some give and take there. So I think the federal regulations have been very daunting. I think, and some of the local stuff through the state and through the local municipalities, I think as far as rezoning of some of the waterfront parcels could hurt. And I just think there's just a situation where people need to talk and barriers need to be broken and dialogue needs to happen. It hasn't happened. And I think there's a role for the Port of New Bedford, so that'd be the Port Authority. I think there's a role for the New Bedford Ocean Cluster. There's a role for the administration, the City Council, and even the media. You talk about the media. I think even you folks at New Bedford Guide and New Bedford Live and everything else you do, I think it'd be wonderful for you to have a podcast and maybe have a fishing boat captain here and maybe someone from the Ocean Cluster, from Vineyard Wind. And not a debate, but have an open discussion and let folks kind of air out their opinions and their concerns.
Absolutely, yeah, we love that.
It's like a kitchen table. A lot of the world's problems and community problems are solved at a kitchen table. I can't stress that enough. It's not always solved in the halls of government, grandstanding in the council chambers or in the halls of Congress or on Beacon Hill and making a big speech or a press conference. It's about sitting down and having honest, frank discussions and dialogue and figuring out some common ground. That might sound corny, but it's the honest to God truth of how I feel. I think a lot of things can be solved sitting down over a cup of coffee.
Well, kind of on a similar subject, because New Bedford's in this weird transitional period. We have the train coming, we have the offshore wind, and the fishing industry kind of changing.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are struggling, especially as renters in New Bedford, really across the country. But, you know, we're talking about New Bedford and Massachusetts. There is a lot of apartments being built in the area. Yeah. But what are some actions that you guys are taking as local government to try to bring down the rental prices for the citizens of New Bedford?
Well, one of the things we did when I was City Council President in 2022, and we've carried that work on, is we had allocated millions of dollars through the American Rescue Act plan, ARPA. That's the acronym ARPA, towards these housing development projects that weren't just market rate, but also workforce and income restricted housing units, so that we could provide more affordable housing units to New Bedfordites or those who want to move here. I think another thing you can do, and we've continued to talk about it here in the city, is to build more units, you have to lessen red tape, lessen bureaucracy in City Hall, get rid of some of these things, and we've been doing that. Like, for example, back in the day, to build onto your property an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, you had to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals to get a special permit. We're working through the ordinance committee right now. We're finalizing that to get rid of that, yank that out. So now you want to build an ADU, no more Zoning Board of Appeals, no more having a hearing and all the bureaucracy of a hearing, and then a month goes by, and then you get a ruling and all this. Now you can just go through the building commissioner, get your permit, get it done. So it's things like that to build more units even onto your property. I think too, you know how you solve the housing crisis too? You allow developers to come into a community that they feel it's business friendly. For better or for worse, New Bedford and you might see it in your comments, New Bedford has the stigma of being an unbusiness-friendly like community, where there is a lot of, again, I'll say red tape and bureaucracy in City Hall, whether it's through certain boards and commissions or certain offices. We've been doing a lot of good work to kind of get rid of that, and it's happening. I think like our building commissioner, Danny Romanowitz, does fantastic work. I think he's underfunded. I think he needs more money to do his job. I'll call him. He's there on a Friday night, Saturday night at 10 o'clock at night because he has a stack of building permits this high, and his inspectors are out doing their great work, and he has to sign off on these, and he's overwhelmed. And I don't mean that he didn't tell me to do this, but I'm just putting it out there. People like him are overwhelmed, and they're underfunded. And I know we try to watch every taxpayer dime that we spend, but the certain departments like that need to be beefed up so that we can get more help for him and for others in those departments, so that we can loosen the restrictions in the sense of getting permits streamlined quicker, get them out there quicker, let developers come into New Bedford quicker, build more units. Let's get the housing stock built back up. And that's part of Josh Amaral housing plan, part of the housing plan that we've all had a hand in, working together collaboratively with the administration, gave him feedback. So that's the biggest thing. And even developers will tell you that. I'm not going to name names, but one of the biggest developers in the city of New Bedford told me, you know how you solve rent control? You know how you solve this issue, or you don't have rent control? Build more units. You build more units. Now, obviously, there's more of a stock to rent from and to rent to. So now, because if it's less housing stock, obviously you can play the game of jacking up the rents, and it's the highest bidder type of a game, right? You get more units, you don't have that problem.
And so the train is coming. There's been rumors for years. My whole life, I was always told the train's coming, the train's coming.
It's finally coming. Your dad will tell you, because he's been in politics a long time. In 1991, I think it was, Governor Weld at the time, I was 6 or 5. Anyway, he said, I think it was 89 or whatever. He said, by 1991 or 92, if you don't get South Coast Rail in New Bedford, you can sue me. He's on the record. Ask your dad about that. It's funny. Your mom might remember it too, but... anyway, 2025 is finally, 2024 into 2025 is when we're finally going to get it. We're going to get it later on this year, so we say.
Yeah,
we'll
so
see.
The train's coming, giving us a direct pipeline into Boston. What impact is that going to make, for good or for bad, for the city of New Bedford?
I think it's going to be more to the good than to the bad. I know it'll raise property values, which in turn could raise rents, which could be an issue. I think there's some creative things we could do with certain radius of zones throughout districts where the rail line is, like whether it's the Wales Tooth area or by Church Street, where property values get capped at a certain price so that people, the property owners aren't paying more in property tax, ergo having to shimmy it on into rent. There's some things maybe creatively we can work on with the state on that, but I think more to the good than the bad. It's going to create two-way commerce, us to them to us, meaning Boston coming down here. It opens a whole new door to tourism, I think, for down here. I think it provides our seniors and those who don't have reliable transportation better access to the world's best healthcare opportunities up in Boston. It provides our folks great opportunities for workforce and jobs. And not just Boston, by the way, all the way up the track. So we're talking Middleborough and Brockton and Bridgewater and Canton, all the way up. So I think it'll be a good thing. I really do. I think anytime you can take more cars and carbon emissions off the road is a good thing, even though it's a diesel train. But it's still less cars off the road. I'm curious what the ridership's going to be. We've seen some numbers. We've been told anything from several hundreds, to maybe even 1,000 or a little bit more per day. I'm sure what's going to happen is the shiny new toy at first. When it first gets here, it'll be mobbed, every train going up to Boston. And then over the next couple of 5-6 months, it'll start tapering off. I know it'll be several runs a day, between 3 and 4. It all depends on, Mass DOT is a business. Mass DOT, that is. It's a business. And if they see we're making it work, then they'll increase the trips up and down every day. They'll give us a few to start. We'll see if it's justified to send more down. I think it'll be nice for the region. I think it'll be great. I mean, even like going to a Red Sox game or a Bruins game.
You don't have to worry about traffic, which is nice.
No, you can hop right on. So
I'm going to Logan Airport tomorrow. I wish I can just hop on a train from, 10 minutes from my house to just get straight to the airport. That'd be nice, not having to wait in traffic.
Now, when you say you're going to Logan Airport tomorrow, of course, when this airs, you were to already you're back already.
Yeah.
You already came back.
Yeah.
So where did you go? Not where were you going? Where did you go?
I'm going to a small town in Wisconsin. I'm working on a documentary.
Good for you.
So, yeah, just a quick 2-day trip.
Well, you worked on a documentary.
I worked on it. Yeah, it's probably already out.
It's already out.
Those things take forever. It won't be out. That still definitely won't be out.
But good for you. Yeah, no, and that's the thing. No, you're right. Because you could hop on the commuter rail, go right to South Station. South Station, you take the Silver Line right to Logan. You're done.
Exactly.
Because I know people say, well, you can go to Middleborough now. Yeah, but you still got to drive your car to Middleborough.
35-minute ride to Middleborough. Yeah, exactly.
Of course. You could go right to Wales Tooth downtown. You can go to the Church Street station. You're there, man.
So speaking about these changes in New Bedford, again, there's a lot of things happening. One thing that Bristol County Sheriff Paul Heroux has been advocating for is to close down the Ash Street Jail. He claims that it would cost too much money to fix it. It would cost more to fix it than to just transfer over the inmates into the Dartmouth campus, is what he calls it. What's your opinion on closing down the Ash Street Jail? And what do you think, if it does get closed down, what should it be turned into?
The only problem is that that's the regional lockup for New Bedford Police. So we'd have to figure out where we could lock up people on like weekends or after hours, because it might be a logistical nightmare to bring people that we apprehend and detain to Dartmouth all the time.
That's a good point. I did not think about that.
So Ash Street is what was used, or what has been used, yeah. But other than that, I'm all for it. I would love to buy it off the state for a couple of bucks, take it off the county's, well, it was the county's, now the state's hand. I'd love to take it off the state's hand and put out an RFP, request for proposal, see what comes back. I would love to get it off our hands and put it on the tax rolls. I think the sheriff is correct. I think it would be a fiscal nightmare to inherit this. It needs a lot of work. I used to work there. I mean, I was a caseworker for the sheriff's office for 2 years. I did some fill-in work over at the Ash Street Jail once in a while. I was mostly out of Dartmouth, but what I'm getting at is it's an old jail, man. It's old. A lot of work needs to be done
Borden
there.
was there.
Over 100 years old. Lizzie Borden was there, and it still has the gallows where you'd hang people even.
Yep. It's the oldest active jail in America.
It is. What's interesting about Ash Street Jail, if you haven't been on the inside, there's a whole outside courtyard, like a vestibule right in the middle. So think of like a donut. It's basically like a donut. There's a big hole in the middle, which is like a square, but that's like where the rec yard is and all of that. So I guess you could do like apartments where the jail part is, and you could do like a community garden in the middle, or you could do, I don't know what.
Well,
I mean,
I asked that to...
Honestly, you know what the best thing might be for a developer? Get a good old-fashioned wrecking ball and knock it down and build.
Start from scratch.
Yeah, that might be the best thing to do, honestly. But again, I'm not a developer. I'm not a builder. You'd have to ask somebody more schooled and educated than me. But it seems to be like I guarantee there must be asbestos in there, lead paint. Think about all those things, you know?
Yeah, and speaking of Sheriff Paul Heroux, he's an interesting person. He's a Democrat, but he seems very middle-of-the-road kind of guy, very different from who the previous sheriff was in Sheriff Hodgson. What do you see from those two people? What are some changes that Heroux has made? Do you like the changes he's making? Do you dislike the changes he's making? Two very different people that have been sheriff.
Well,
in Bristol County.
I wish, I have no problem. You know, I've always gotten along with Sheriff Hodgson. I used to work for him. I consider him a friend. I like the new sheriff. I like Paul Heroux. He and I have talked a lot about different issues. I just wish that the Community Works program was back into the community, meaning the pre-release inmates that would go out and do community service. I wish that was reinstituted a little bit. It's a win-win. The inmates get good time for doing it, and you're providing a service for the community, and the inmates like to get out of their units. They like to get out of their cells. So I wish, and I hope that comes back. I know, like, for instance, like the Madeira Feast this past summer or the Whaling City Festival. They used to rely on Sheriff Hodgson's inmates to go and pick up garbage and help them with moving some heavy-duty things and some maintenance work in that sense. They didn't have that this year. So it falls on community volunteers and people who aren't getting paid. So I hope that he considers really reinstituting that and getting it to where it needs to be. I know that Sheriff Hodgson used to have the K-9 units out in the community and doing a lot of that stuff and helping with crime investigation. Sheriff Heroux's pulled that back. Given the fact that when we had a shooting in New Bedford about a month ago now, we had the Plymouth County Sheriff's Office out doing forensics. That to me was shameful. Not really on the New Bedford police because we were so undermanned that night, but it's the fact that we didn't have Bristol County at least helping us. We had Plymouth County coming down. So I hope there's some things that, I mean, he's doing, like from what I'm hearing from a lot of my friends who still work there, they have no problem with him. I mean, he's been very transparent with the staff. They seem to be getting along well together. From what I've heard, there's been no issues in the jail. These are just things, as someone who represents New Bedford, I'd like to see reinstituted as far as the community goes.
Yeah, and speaking on the police being understaffed, I believe we still are currently understaffed, our police department. I know that we have created measures to try to bring in new talent, $5,000 sign-on bonus. I think it's like a $64,000 starting pay or something like that. Do you feel like we're doing enough to bring in new talent, or is this just a national issue that every department's facing?
It is a national issue, but I'm paid by the New Bedford taxpayers to figure out New Bedford problems. I'm not paid by the taxpayers of Brockton or Fall River. So it is a national problem. I could say that and step back, and to me, that's a cop-out answer. It's the truth, but it's a cop-out. I think the $5,000 recruitment's a good start. I said this at the beginning. Recruitment is fine. It's about retention, though, of who we have. We still have not addressed retention of the police rank and file here in our Department of New Bedford. We have officers who did great work all throughout the COVID pandemic, out on the streets, and right into the mix of all that was bad in 2020. The disease, the plague, everything. Working.
The riots, the Black Lives Matter riots.
The riots we had in our downtown, and ours got a little... Our riots, I don't want to say they're riots, but our protests in New Bedford, they got on the cusp of getting really, really bad. Thank God they didn't get really bad like you saw in Milwaukee or in Seattle. Thank God thank God it didn't get there. But what I'm getting at is, you look at Fall River, for example. I know you folks cover Fall River. Mayor Coogan gave retention bonuses through American Rescue Act money to his officers in the rank and file. I would have liked to have seen that here in New Bedford. The mayor didn't want to do that. I fought for that. Many others fought for that. It didn't happen. And then what happens is that officers get poached left and right. It's not personal, it's business. So what happens is word gets out that officers in New Bedford aren't happy. And then before you know it, you have police departments in Freetown and Marion and Carver reaching out saying, hey, come over here, lateral move, or even if it's a little bit of a pay cut, the quality of life's going to be better. We're going to have your back. You're not worried about as much violence or domestic issues. It's a little better of a quality of life. Come on out. And we've been dealing with that. So whatever we're gaining, we're also losing as through attrition. So we're losing some due to retirement. We're losing some because of transfers, but what we're getting in, it's like shoveling it against the tide. You know what I mean? We're shoveling it against the tide, but we're losing it out. So we need to do a better job with retention of who we have. And there are some federal things that I think are in the works too, that are in the pipeline that I've been very supportive of. Like, for example, if you want to sign on to be a police officer, there's some federal legislation that's being floated out as a possibility where if you're a police officer, you can get low interest financing on mortgages for your home. But you've got to sign on. You've got to sign a contract to say that you want to be an officer for at least 10 years with that municipality or whatever. But there's some legislation in the works federally, things that we can't do because that's federal. But I would be in support of things like that as well to try to incentivize new people to come on because, yeah, policing is a noble profession. And I think, and I'll tie it back into the national narrative you talked about, a lot of defund nonsense, a lot of that garbage gets floated out there, defund police, divest police. I don't support that. You need to fund your police. Now, I want to be very clear. Just because I say fund the police and back the blue, which unabashedly, I back the blue. I come from a law enforcement family. My stepbrother and my stepfather are all state troopers, but I back the blue, but I'll also be the first one to call out and expose a bad police officer, okay? You can back the blue and expose, call out, suspend and terminate, and call for the prosecution of a bad cop. You can do both. It's not one or the other. It's not all cops are bad or, you know, the thin blue line and you don't, and even if someone's doing something bad, you don't out them or expose them. No, it's not one or the other. You can back the cops because 99.999% of them are all great people. That 0.0001% that might not be doing right, that betrays the public trust, they should absolutely be exposed, fired, and prosecuted. And I'll say that till I'm blue in the face.
Yeah, and do you have any innovative ideas of how we can possibly create more funding to pay our police force a higher, more livable wage? Because I'm pretty sure I was looking on their website earlier. I think it's a $64,000 starting pay or average pay. I think starting pay with a $5,000 sign-on bonus. And I would think for me, I mean, you can love the job, but I mean, any day you can die being a police officer. That's just the reality of the job. So $64,000 to potentially not come home at night, it's not really a good selling point, right? I think that's probably why we're understaffed. And again, it's a national issue. We're not the only city in the country, but I mean, good cities are innovative, right? I mean, are there any innovative ways that we can create more funding to pay our police better so we're not losing the Dartmouth, Acushnet, Westport?
And the thing like I talked about with Fall River, when they gave the American Rescue Act money to those officers, that's great. But remember something, grant money and all that, that's a one-off. That's one-time dollars. And if you depend on those things, like the SAFER grant for the firefighters, if you depend on grants to fund your operations, what's going to happen eventually, like it always does, the well is going to dry. Once the well dries, you've now created a structural deficit in your department or your operating costs. Now, what do you have to do? You got to bang the taxpayer, or you have to transfer from Peter to pay Paul, other departments. I think, obviously there's a state play in this. I think the state could help step up a little bit more in creating more incentive packages for police officers or folks who want to be police officers to come in and get into the tent. I think the low interest or no interest mortgage rates, I think, would help. I think, obviously, providing, and we see it. There is a lot of packages out there too, though, like the Quinn Bill. There's some in-state tuition initiative programs to help.
The Quinn Bill, is that where the more you go to school, the higher your degree is, the more you get paid?
Yeah, it's correct, right?
But they don't have that in New Bedford, right?
Well, that's the thing. So we need to continue to make sure that that our advocacy for these things comes to fruition in New Bedford. I think that's the problem. I think a lot of problems too, Steve, is that the money just isn't there locally from our taxpayers. Our taxpayers are stretched thin, and that's the reality. We just cut over $10 million from the city budget. We cut $9 million last year, and I know, for example, for me, I just got my updated escrow statement for my mortgage, and my mortgage just went down $1,200 for the year going into next year because the council did its job. The council did its job and cut the budget, which I give the council a lot of credit for doing that. So we got to watch our tax dollars. We got to figure out how we fund the police department appropriately, but to a level where we're not bankrupting our taxpayers. It's a balancing act. How do we keep and attract and retain people that we have or that we want to bring in, but also not price our seniors out of their homes? You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a state play in this. There's a federal play in this. I think a lot of the responsibility does lie with us locally on figuring out creative solutions on how we can better attract a good stock of people who want to be police officers. But again, there's no panacea to this. There's no one magic bean that solves the problem. It's collaborative, and I think we have to work together, with our state partners, our federal partners. That's the key, I think. But I think for starters, though, the national narrative has to stop that policing is bad work, that cops are bad people. That's not the case. I think that'll help too, because think about it. I mean, your job is journalism, right? If the narrative was that you're corrupt, you're a bad person, you're killing people, you're hurting people, and then you and your family's life were always in jeopardy, right? You were afraid to go home, or your address got leaked online like we saw with a lot of cops, or their addresses got put on Facebook. You'd say, I'm getting out of this industry, or I don't want to be in this industry. Officers, same thing. They don't want to be like that. That's why if you notice a lot of police officers, they either got rid of their Facebook pages, or a lot of them just changed the names on their Facebook because they don't want to be exposed. It's dangerous work.
Well, on a similar topic, New Bedford, I'm pretty sure I read so last year there was some kind of third party came into the New Bedford Police Department and did a whole analyzation on the department, on what they're doing good, what they're doing bad, the crime statistics and everything like that. And I think I remember from reading that New Bedford averages about 4 murders per year. And off the top of my head, I think we're already past that this year.
Yeah.
And it just kind of, and I'm not, this isn't facts I'm reading off a piece of paper, but just covering the city, I'm pretty sure we're above 4 already. Yeah. And it kind of just feels like there's a stabbing or shooting or some violent incident happening almost on a weekly basis. What is a solution to stopping the violence in New Bedford? Do you have any ideas?
Well, more officers on the street. That's number one. I know that's easier said than done. We need more. We need more detectives out on the street in narcotics investigating these crimes. A lot of it this is a very deep socioeconomic problem, which could take an hour in of itself. But a lot of it starts in the home. That's sad. A lot of parents aren't raising their children the way they should be. There's ghost guns out there, these fake guns that are being made but have the same capacity as a gun, regular handgun.
3D printed guns.
With 3D printed guns. We're seeing weapons of war now in the Blue Meadows area. We saw a shooting 2 weeks ago, or a week and a half now ago over there. A lot of it's gang related. None of it seems random. It's not random. A lot of it's gang related. It's over turf. It's over territory. It's very sad. It's very unfortunate. What happens too is a lot of the victims of violent crime know who the perpetrators were or are, but they won't give the information out.
And then they'll retaliate.
Because they'll retaliate and they're in fear of their life. So now the police don't know where to go. They've got no leads. And I think that's obviously a serious issue. It's sad because I've never seen it this bad. I've seen it bad here and there, but this is probably the worst I've ever seen with the violence in the city. A lot of it is gang related. Most of it is. And I think this begins to get to the root cause of it. You got to get to these kids at a much younger age because they get recruited in the elementary, even in middle school levels. I think we've got to, and this is why I support SROs in our schools, because that bridges the gap between police and law enforcement and the youth to show them that our law enforcement people are good people. They're there to help. More innovative programs and approaches in our schools and through community watch groups and neighborhoods to make sure that these kids aren't getting recruited at a young age. It's like a sports team, right? You're not going to win if you don't keep drafting good players. Well, if we nix the draft meaning getting new potential gang members, then the gangs can't thrive and live on if we cut it out right at the source. So I think that's a key piece too. Checking in on these families, making sure that that no one is ever put in compromising positions by some fear tactics by gang leaders for recruitment or for assisting crimes. It's a very touchy subject for everybody, but there is a play here, and I believe it starts with the kids. The kids have to be really engaged at a young age to show them that a life of crime is not a good way to go. And the statistics have shown that if you have an illegal handgun, you're 10 times more likely to die at a younger age than you are if you don't have an illegal handgun, because the odds are you're going to get caught up in a spray and bullet match with somebody in a gang fight, or you're going to be in confrontation with the police officer. You're going to brandish your gun. The police officer might have to do what they've got to do to survive, to go home. You're 10 times more likely to be executed if you carry an illegal handgun in the streets than if you don't. Think about that. Nobody wants to die. So I think if you talk about it from those angles and say, hey, look, here are the options. You're going to be put away in state prison for 20, 30, 40 years, maybe life if it's a homicide, or you're going to be 6 feet under in a wooden box. Those are your two options if you continue down this path. I think a little bit of scared straight really works in many sense. You're not going to solve every recruitment effort. You're not going to stop everyone. But if we can at least chip away at 15, 20% of the recruitment efforts, 30%, little by little, showing that there are avenues through engagement in schools and academia and trades. Trades are important. Kids working with their hands. It's all intermingled, intertwined. But I think there's a lot of work to be done with the gang stuff in New Bedford. A lot of work.
Do you think that the judges have some responsibility here, being too lenient in Massachusetts, specifically Bristol County? I hear that a lot in the comments, or not even the comments. Our New Bedford Police Department kind of mentions this whenever they lock up someone for the 47,000th time. They there's a lot of statements from the Bedford police chief, really stressed out and annoyed by the fact that these guys are.
Yeah. No, and I agree with him because it's always slaps on the wrist we seem to get here in here locally in our court system. It slaps on the wrist, slaps on the wrist, slaps on the wrist. And I don't understand why that is. There are some violent offenders, those who violate parole, violate probation. Sometimes, and those folks do get put away. But what I'm getting at there, because you're violating parole, you're violating a probation, that means you're a repeat offender. We have a lot of repeat offenders that are continuously going through the criminal justice system. And the penalties and the fines and the jail time is not commensurate with what you should be getting dealt with for what the crime that you're committing. And it makes you wonder, some other counties and states throughout the country, their judges are elected. Do we have to rewrite the Massachusetts Constitution so that our judges are elected? I'm not sure that's the answer either, because if our judges are elected, yeah, you're accountable like I am at the ballot box. So if you don't do right, you get voted out. But are your jobs political now? Do you look at things through a political lens if you're a judge now? Like, well, I don't want to make that ruling because this could hurt me with a donor or my constituents. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I know it's very, very easy to say, yeah, have the judges get voted in because now they're accountable at the ballot box. They don't do right by us, we'll 86 them. Well, yeah, you could, but also, are they going to be really unbiased and unprejudiced now if they're not at the ballot box? So I'm not sure that's the answer either.
That's a good point.
I just think there's a role for the governor's council because they oversee the applications, the confirmations or revocations of judgeships from the governor. That the governor nominates the judges to the governor's council. They hold the hearings. So I think maybe there's some more stringent accountability with the governor's council on the judges to make sure that they're applying the full letter of the law and they're trying to advocate for more maximum sentences on some of these crimes that the law and the statutes allow for. I know the district attorney has been calling for that. I know our police chief has been calling for that. I'm with them 100%.
Real quick, we have to get you out of here. I wanted to ask you about a specific ballot question because not only are you a city councilor, but you own a restaurant.
Yeah.
So question 5 is the minimum wage for tipped workers. Essentially, right now, it's $6.75 base pay for waitresses, bartenders, and they want to raise that to $15 an hour. My take on this, and from what I've heard from a lot of people who are in the restaurant industry, is waitresses and bartenders make much more than $15 an hour off of tips. And this would just more than doubling the amount that the restaurant would have to pay these workers would make their margins so much more smaller than they already are that a lot of restaurants would go out of business. And you're going to pay more taxes as a waitress and bartender.
You've got to say no on question 5. You've got to say no. I know it's they're going to make more an hour and this and that. But you're right. The studies have shown, and the Chamber of Commerce has put out data on this, and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and all these people have put out data. Look, you get more when you tip. If you go out to dinner with your wife, all right, and you know that waitress or waiter is getting $15 an hour, I know I'm not tipping now. I'm not going to tip because they're getting a higher wage. So, or you're less inclined to tip, or if you do tip, it's going to be much less because you know they're getting paid more. That's just the way it goes. You're going to hurt the employer. You're going to hurt the waiter or waitress. Vote no on question 5. It's funny. I believe it was Maine. I think it was Maine. Maine tried this about 7 or 8 years ago. And at the time, the restaurant lobbyists and the folks up in Maine, they were for it. Yahoo, minimum wage. Let's do this. We want a good wage. And forget about the tips. We're getting peanuts. At the time, I think it was $2 and something an hour for wait staff. So the Maine legislature enacted it. Okay, they were campaigning for it. The governor signs it. About 7 or 8 months into it, the waitress, wait staff, the restaurants, they all said, "Oh my God, what a friggin' disaster this is." You can look at it, they all stormed the Hill in Maine, in Bangor, Maine. They went to their governor's office. They literally stormed the governor's office, the legislature. They said, "You've got to enact new legislation. You've got to reverse this. This is a friggin' nightmare." And they did. So learn from Maine's mistake, okay, Massachusetts? Vote no on question 5.
Ian Abreu, I appreciate you coming on, and you're welcome on the show anytime, man.
Thanks, Steve. Good to see you, man.